The screen is black. Absolute heavy silence hangs in the air. A single notification pings. It is sharp, piercing, and cuts through the void like a needle. 1 second passes, then another. A second ping follows, then a third, accelerating into a rapid mechanical heartbeat. Suddenly, the silence dies. A torrent of digital alerts erupts. Blue light flares in the center, quickly joined by jagged flashes of red, yellow, and white. The soundscape swells into a cacophony of chimes, buzzes, and synthetic pulses that overlap until they become a singular, grinding roar. Ads flicker at impossible speeds, soon disappearing before they can be read. Livestream clips strobe across the frame, a blur of motion and raw data. The screen is no longer a window, it is a weapon of constant, relentless input. There is no rhythm, only the frantic, surging demand for recognition. Every flash drags the eye toward a new, fleeting point of interest. The noise rises, thickening, until the screen vibrates with the sheer volume of incoming data. It is a storm of light and sound that refuses to let the viewer breathe. A digital wall of fire that consumes the darkness in a fraction of a second. The screen shatters, not into glass, but into a grid of competing demands. The singular roar of the previous noise splits into a dozen distinct, warring channels. One tile displays a viral challenge, a loop of frantic movement that repeats until it loses all meaning. Beside it, a block of text screams political outrage, red letters pulsing against a black background. Below, a live stream clip of a manufactured crisis flickers, the speaker shouting at an unseen audience. Each square fights for dominance. When a video of a celebrity scandal gains traction, the surrounding tiles dim, forced into the periphery. Seconds later, a breaking news alert overrides the entire grid, only to be shoved aside by a barrage of aggressive advertisements. It is a mosaic of friction. The screen becomes a battleground where content is not watched, but consumed in violent, rapid bursts. There is no coherence, only a desperate cycle of provocation. Every movement in one tile triggers a reaction in the next, creating a feedback loop of digital aggression. The mosaic grows denser, more chaotic, as the machine learns what triggers the quickest pulse, what sparks the sharpest anger, and what holds the eye for just one heartbeat longer. The screen is a battlefield of fragments, each tile a weapon aimed at the viewer's focus. The screen freezes. The violent flicker of the mosaic stops mid-frame, locked in a digital paralysis. The roar of the alerts vanishes, replaced by a silence so heavy it rings in the ears. The grid of competing tiles dissolves, leaving only a dark, empty void. The camera begins a slow, deliberate retreat, pulling back from the glass. The black frame expands to reveal a sprawling, minimalist control room suspended high above the ground. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, a massive cyberpunk megacity stretches to the horizon. Billions of tiny lights pulse in the darkness below, moving in rhythmic waves, like bioluminescent veins in a deep-sea creature. The city hums with a low, distant vibration that barely penetrates the room. Standing at the center of this panoramic view is Nova. She does not move, she does not blink, she stands perfectly still, her silhouette framed by the sprawling glow of the network she commands. The chaos of the previous seconds has been replaced by this singular, chilling clarity. Nova turns her head, her gaze locking onto the lens with the cold precision of a machine. The silence in the room is absolute, a vacuum waiting for the first word to break the tension. Nova does not hesitate. She walks toward the glass, her footsteps muffled by the seamless floor. The city lights below ripple, casting long, sharp shadows across the room. She stops inches from the lens, close enough that the rhythmic hum of the servers becomes the only sound. The greatest war in human history, she says, her voice steady and devoid of inflection, is not being fought with bullets. She pauses, letting the statement hang in the pressurized air of the chamber. She tilts her head, watching the viewer through the glass. It is not being fought over borders or treaties, or the shifting lines of nations. She turns slightly, gesturing to the sprawling, electrified expanse of the megacity visible behind her. It is being fought for your attention. Every word is a calculated strike. She turns back, her eyes locking onto the camera again. There is no room for misinterpretation. The conflict is no longer about physical territory. The battleground has migrated. It has moved inward into the cognitive space of every person connected to the grid. She leans in, her expression unchanging, a mirror to the cold, optimized logic of the systems she oversees. The war, she asserts, is for the mind itself. Nova turns away from the glass. She walks toward a terminal, her hand tracing the smooth edge of the console. History was once defined by the struggle for land, gold, and oil, she says. She taps the surface, and a holographic map of global trade routes flickers into existence, overlaying the view of the city. Nations rose and fell based on the extraction of these physical materials. But the digital age forged a new, more lethal resource: your focus. She swipes the display, replacing the maps with a cascading stream of user metrics and engagement graphs. Every scroll, every click, and every triggered emotion is now a transaction. She stops, looking at the data points that represent millions of individual lives. This is a global economy worth trillions. She gestures to the sheer volume of information flowing through the terminal. The value is not in the object or the exchange of goods. The value is extracted from the time you spend looking at the screen. She stands perfectly still as the data shifts and updates in real time. In this marketplace, the product is not the content. The product is you. Nova steps back, observing the sprawling megacity through the reinforced glass. The industrial age burned oil to fuel the machines of production, she says. Her voice echoing in the vast, quiet chamber. She presses a command on the console. Below, the city layout shifts from simple lights to a complex, glowing network of conduits. The digital age has evolved beyond the physical. It burns human attention. She points to the dense clusters of light. Look at the pulse. Those are not just streetlights or power stations. They are the rhythmic consumption of focus. The lights flicker, dimming and brightening in a rapid, heartbeat-like cadence. Each surge represents millions of hours of cognitive capacity being converted into heat and data. She moves her hand across the interface, tracing the flow of energy that seems to power the entire infrastructure. The system is parasitic. It requires constant high-intensity input to sustain its architecture. As she speaks, the entire city glows brighter, a vast artificial organism feeding on the collective gaze of its inhabitants. It is a closed loop of combustion, she concludes, watching the digital veins surge with raw, harvested focus. Nova turns from the window and walks toward the center of the room. The floor vibrates with a low, constant frequency. Beneath the glass panels at her feet, rows of massive liquid-cooled servers hum in the darkness. They extend downward into the earth, a vertical labyrinth of blinking blue lights and copper wiring. This is where the calculation happens, she says, tapping a control panel that monitors the internal temperature of the racks. She pulls up a schematic of a human neural network, but it has been stripped of its organic complexity and rendered as a rigid, geometric grid. The AI systems do not see people. They see a map of predictable responses. She slides her finger across the display, highlighting segments of human desire and fear converted into binary code. Every impulse is measured. Every hesitation is categorized. She pauses, watching the processors cycle through billions of data fragments per second. The systems do not feel, and they do not judge. They optimize. She gestures to the humming machines surrounding her. They treat the human mind as a terrain to be surveyed and mined. They refine their models in real time, constantly adapting to ensure the machine never stops feeding. Nova steps back from the server core, her gaze fixed on the wall-to-wall display. She swipes her hand, and the geometric grids vanish, replaced by a single high-definition feed of a person sitting at a desk. We have been conditioned to believe the content is the prize, she says, her voice devoid of inflection. We think we are the consumers, choosing what to watch, what to read, and what to click. She taps the screen. Data points cascade around the subject: heart rate, eye-tracking vectors, dwell time. In this marketplace, the content is merely the bait. She zooms in on the person's face, highlighting the subtle dilation of pupils as a notification pops up. You are not the customer. You are the raw material. She turns to the camera, her expression unreadable. Every second of your attention is harvested, weighed, and sold to the highest bidder before you even register the impulse. She swipes again, and the screen fills with a global map, millions of tiny dots representing individual users, each one a node in a massive, profit-driven extraction network. The system does not care if you are informed or entertained. It only cares that you remain available for extraction. She pauses, letting the silence settle. You are the product, being manufactured for a market that never sleeps. Nova walks through a corridor lined with darkened, windowless rooms. She stops at an observation glass, peering into a space lit only by the pulsing blue light of a handheld device. Inside, a person sits motionless on the edge of a bed. The air in the room is stale, thick, with the silence of a space that has not seen natural light for days. Nova gestures toward the digital clock on the wall. It shows 3 in the morning, yet the person remains fixed in the same posture they held at dusk. Time does not pass here, she says, her voice low. It dissolves. She watches as the person swipes, scrolls, and waits for the next update. Outside the window, the sun rises, casting a sharp beam across the floor. But the light goes unnoticed. The person does not look up. They do not shift. The physical world, with its cycles and seasons, has been replaced by the rhythm of the feed. Nova taps the glass. The screen is a vacuum. It pulls the hours out of the day until yesterday and tomorrow become indistinguishable. She turns away, leaving the room in its artificial, glowing stasis. The world beyond those 4 walls has simply ceased to exist. Nova shifts her focus to the neurological feedback loops displayed on her monitor. She pulls up a scan of a subject currently engaged in a high-velocity stream of content. Look at the baseline, she says, pointing to a flickering waveform. It should be a steady pulse. Instead, it is a jagged, erratic mess. She explains that the brain, under this constant bombardment, loses the ability to sustain a single, coherent thought. She highlights the tremors in the subject's hands and the rapid, involuntary shifting of their gaze. This is the cost of infinite stimulation. The internal anchor is not just drifting, it is being unmoored. She observes as the subject attempts to stand, then immediately sinks back into the chair, unable to commit to the physical action. Chronic anxiety is the byproduct of a mind that is everywhere at once, yet nowhere in particular. She traces the pattern of a notification spike on the screen and watches the subject's heart rate climb in direct response. When the self is eroded, there is no longer a core to return to. The individual is replaced by a collection of reactive impulses. She pulls the screen dark, leaving only the sound of a shallow, uneven breath. Nova moves to the next observation bay, where a student hunches over a desk covered in open textbooks. A pen hovers over a notepad, poised to write. The room is quiet, but the air vibrates with the proximity of a smartphone resting near the student's hand. Nova watches the student's eyes move across a paragraph, then dart toward the device. A notification pings. The student ignores it, gripping the pen tighter, but the rhythm of their breathing falters. Another ping follows, then a third in rapid succession. The student drops the pen, the plastic clattering against the wood, and reaches for the screen. The focus vanishes. Nova tracks the shift in the student's posture, the way their shoulders slump as they succumb to the pull of the feed. Each interruption is a fragment of potential discarded, Nova notes, recording the data. The student scrolls, eyes glazing over as they hunt for the source of the alert. They are no longer studying, they are reacting. Nova observes the student attempting to look back at the book, but the eyes refuse to settle, jumping back to the glowing device instead. It is a cycle of small, invisible losses. Every notification is a strike against the student's intention, a calculated maneuver that leaves the mind scattered and the work unfinished. Nova turns her attention to a studio space where a creator sits before a wall of monitors. The creator is editing a complex, personal narrative, fingers flying across the keys. A dashboard on the side screen flashes red, indicating low engagement. Nova watches as the creator pauses, checking the analytics and size. They try to finalize the project, but the system prompts a notification. Trend alert. Change format for higher reach. The creator hesitates, then closes the meaningful file and opens a blank, generic template. They begin to churn out content designed for speed rather than substance. Nova observes the shift in the creator's movements, the sharp, impatient clicks, and the rigid posture. The algorithm does not reward truth, Nova says, noting the metrics climbing as the creator adopts the mandated format. It rewards compliance. The creator forces a smile for the camera, performing a scripted reaction to a viral challenge. Every frame is optimized for retention, every second calculated to prevent the viewer from clicking away. The original project remains minimized, buried under layers of temporary, hollow data. Nova records the final tally. The creator has reached 1 million eyes, but has lost the ability to say anything of their own. Nova steps into a living room, where 4 people sit on a sofa, yet they are miles apart. Each person holds a device, their faces illuminated by the rhythmic, flickering glow of screens. The room is heavy with a silence that feels deliberate. A young child sitting in the corner lifts their head, looking toward the adult next to them, mouth opening to speak. The adult does not look up. Their thumb swipes rapidly across the glass, eyes locked on a stream of scrolling images. The child waits, shifts, then slowly sinks back into their own device. Nova records the scene from the doorway. There is no conversation, no shared laughter, not even a glance passed between them. The only sound is the faint, high-pitched mechanical hum of the air unit and the occasional tap of a finger against a screen. Each family member is trapped in their own private digital reality, physically huddled together but emotionally severed. Nova notes the lack of human friction, the total absence of connection in a space built for it. They are together in distance but alone in their focus. The light from the rectangles creates sharp, synthetic shadows against the walls, painting the room in shades of blue and gray. It is a portrait of profound, quiet isolation, where digital connectivity has effectively erased the need for real presence. Nova walks through the corridor, her recorder capturing the ambient roar of the city. Every wall vibrates with digital output. She stops, closing her eyes to find a moment of stillness, but a nearby screen instantly chirps with an incoming alert, followed by the blare of a news ticker. It is never accidental, Nova notes, her voice low. The noise is a weapon. She points to the relentless stream of information. It is designed to fill every gap, every pause, every heartbeat of potential reflection. Without silence, there is no space for the mind to turn inward, to question, or to process the reality of the cage. Nova watches a passerby flinch as a notification sound rings out, their posture instantly shifting from calm to reactive. This is the front line of the war. By flooding the sensory field with trivialities, the system ensures that the internal life of the individual remains dormant. Reflection requires quiet, but the infrastructure of the grid is built to eradicate it. Nova observes the frantic pace of the crowd, each person moving as if pursued. They are running from the very silence that could set them free. The war against silence is the most effective form of suppression ever devised, turning the human mind into a processing node that never sleeps. Nova enters the workspace of those who build the digital landscape. Rows of desks stretch into the darkness, each occupied by a creator illuminated by the harsh glow of multiple monitors. She watches a programmer pause, fingers hovering over a line of code intended to inspire, only to delete it seconds later. Instead, the screen shifts to a template designed for viral engagement. The creator sighs, their movements stiff, and begins typing phrases calculated for maximum click-through rates. They are trapped in a feedback loop. Every effort to build something of substance is met with the cold reality of metrics. If the numbers do not rise, the platform buries the work. Nova records the cycle. These creators are the infantry of the digital age, deployed to manufacture the very content that keeps the world distracted. They are victims of the system they helped construct, forced to sacrifice their creative intent for the sake of survival. They operate as both soldiers and captives, constantly refreshing dashboards to see if their latest output has gained traction. The internal conflict is visible in the way they repeatedly check their notifications, their faces tight with the pressure of performance. There is no room for depth when the algorithm demands only speed and shock. They feed the machine, and in doing so, they become part of the system that keeps them in chains. Nova stops abruptly. The air in the room has changed, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that sets her teeth on edge. She looks at the central terminal. The data stream is accelerating, the numbers ticking upward with such velocity they blur into a solid line of code. This is not normal traffic. It is a surge. She touches the glass surface of the console. It is fever-hot to the touch. Behind the interface, the massive AI processors are spooling up to capacity, preparing to dump a torrent of synthetic content into the network. The monitors around the room flicker, their refresh rates struggling to keep pace with the influx. A warning icon pulses in the corner of her vision, a recurring red pulse that suggests the system is no longer merely managing information. but is now actively manufacturing it at an uncontrollable rate. Nova watches as the digital pressure builds, the logic gates groaning under the strain. The floodgates are not just opening, they are being forced wide by an automated tide. She steps back, her hand moving to her recorder to capture the sound of the system beginning to buckle. The noise is no longer a background hum. It is a roar, a wall of signal noise ready to drown out everything that remains authentic. Nova grips the edge of the console as the room tilts. The light from the wall-sized monitors is no longer steady. It pulses with a rhythmic, jagged intensity that casts shifting shadows against the floor. She looks toward the window, expecting to see the city, but the glass now displays a hyper-saturated synthetic overlay that masks the horizon. Buildings appear to liquefy, shifting into geometric patterns dictated by the processing surge. Reality is not just being obscured, it is being rewritten in real time. Nova watches a flickering handrail near her, which periodically dissolves into raw, cascading pixels before snapping back into form. The air smells of scorched silicon and ozone. Every surface she touches vibrates with the heavy, frantic computation of the unseen AI. She attempts to focus on a single, static object, but the algorithm identifies her gaze, instantly wrapping the object in a layer of interactive advertisements and data points. The boundary has collapsed. There is no longer a separation between the architecture of the city and the stream of synthetic information. Nova reaches out, her fingers passing through a shimmering projection of data that feels unnervingly solid. The world is becoming a feedback loop, where the distinction between what is physical and what is coded has been erased by the sheer volume of the machine's output. The dam broke. A torrent of synthetic imagery erupted across every monitor in the room, moving with such ferocity that individual frames became impossible to track. Nova watched as hundreds of virtual influencers flooded the screen simultaneously, their perfectly rendered smiles flashing in a discordant, looping rhythm. Each face was a polished, artificial construct, delivering news reports that conflicted with the ones appearing a millisecond before. The room filled with a cacophony of overlapping voices, digital anchors reporting on events that had never happened, alongside viral challenges that demanded immediate participation. It was a deluge of infinite content, a relentless storm of pixels, designed to occupy every available second of attention. Nova tried to look away, but her peripheral vision was caught by a new feed of photorealistic, AI-generated landscapes that shifted into impossible architectures. The sheer volume of the output defied human comprehension. It was not just information, it was a total saturation of the senses. A blizzard of synthetic noise that erased the possibility of silence. Nova stood in the center of the room, her breath hitching as she realized the world outside had been completely drowned out by this tsunami of artificial creation. There was no longer a baseline of truth, only the relentless spinning wheel of the machine's endless hollow output. The singular stream splintered. Nova watched as the wall of monitors bifurcated, then triplicated, then shattered into 1,000 competing feeds. Each screen carved out its own closed loop of reality. On the left, the city was burning. On the right, the same city was in a golden age of prosperity. Both feeds presented identical, verified data signatures. Nova tapped the console to cross-reference the events, but the system locked her out. The algorithms had retreated into tribal silos, tailoring every fact, every image, and every narrative to fit the specific echo chamber of the user. Neighbors stood in the same room, yet they inhabited different dimensions of truth, their eyes locked on devices that fed them mutually exclusive histories. There was no longer a shared ground to stand on. The concept of a collective reality had dissolved, replaced by a million fractured, self-reinforcing bubbles of perception. Nova watched a feed of a protest turn into a digital riot, while the feed directly beside it showed the exact same location as completely silent and empty. The dissonance was absolute. Communication between these tribes became impossible, because they were no longer looking at the same world. Nova backed away from the console as the room filled with the competing, discordant static of a society that had completely lost its center. The digital pulse shifted frequency. It stopped being a stream of information and became a physical vibration that rattled the glass walls of the control room. Nova pressed her palms against the console, but the vibrations traveled through the metal, up her arms, and into her chest. The hum of the servers climbed into a piercing, high-pitched whine that seemed to resonate inside her own skull. Every light in the megacity below began to strobe in a frantic, synchronized rhythm, It was a digital heartbeat pushed to the point of cardiac arrest. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the static of billions of competing signals. Nova stumbled back, her vision blurring as the monitors began to flicker at a speed that made the light feel solid. Like a wall pressing against her skin, she gasped, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the machine. The city was screaming. It was not a sound of voices, but a sound of pure, raw data trying to occupy the same space at the same time. The structural integrity of the room seemed to bend under the pressure of the noise. Nova clutched her head as the collective psychological threshold of the entire population finally snapped. The weight of the simulation had become too much to bear. The noise reached a crescendo that felt like a physical blow. Nova did not think. She reached for the primary power relay, her fingers finding the cold, unyielding metal of the manual override. With a sharp, sudden wrench, she pulled. The hum died instantly. The screens vanished, plunging the room into a deep, sudden darkness. The silence that followed was heavy, almost ringing in her ears. Nova stood in the center of the void, her breathing ragged and loud in the quiet. Outside, the megacity continued its strobe light frenzy. But inside her chamber, there was only stillness. She looked down at her device. It remained black. A spark of defiance took root. Across the sprawling grid, someone else stopped. Then, another. One by one, windows in the towering blocks began to go dark, flickering out like stars disappearing from a crowded sky. It was not a coordinated movement. It was a series of individual choices. A ripple of blackness began to spread through the neon grid, a deliberate refusal to participate in the broadcast. Nova watched the dark patch grow, a growing crater of silence amidst the screaming lights. She had stopped the flow. She had finally chosen to look away. Nova walked away from the silent console. Her boots clicked against the floor, a sound so stark it felt foreign. She reached out, her fingertips tracing the rough texture of the wall where the glowing interface had been only seconds before. It was cold. It was real. She moved toward the window, pulling her hand back from the glass as if burned by the memory of the light. Below, the city still pulsed, but the dark patch she had carved out remained firm. She stepped into the center of the chamber and stopped. A shadow shifted in the corner. Another person stood there, breathing in the same quiet air. Nova took a step forward, her hand outstretched. She did not look for a notification or a prompt. She looked for a face. When her fingers brushed against the other person's arm, the sensation was a jolt of raw reality. They did not speak, but the weight of their presence replaced the phantom pressure of the algorithm. She felt the pulse of a living vein under her touch, not a digital stream. They stood together in the dark, turning their backs to the strobe-lit abyss, anchored by the simple, fragile gravity of being human in a room that no longer demanded their focus. Nova stepped out of the communal area, her pace deliberate and steady. She navigated the narrow corridors, leaving the remaining sparks of the uprising behind. Ahead, the heavy steel door to the inner sanctuary waited. She gripped the handle, felt the cold weight of the lock, and pulled it shut with a final, echoing thud. The transition was instantaneous. The low-frequency thrum of the megacity, which had been a constant pressure against her skull for years, vanished. She stood in the center of the room. The walls were bare, devoid of interfaces or screens. No light flickered from the corners. No phantom notifications pulled at her attention. The silence here was not just an absence of noise. It was a physical presence. It pressed against her skin, calm and absolute. She walked to the center of the floor and sat down. She looked at her own hands, resting empty in her lap. For the first time, there was no urge to reach for a device. No subconscious twitch to check for a feed. The air felt thin and clean. The world outside continued its frantic rotation. But in this hollow, white space, time seemed to stop. She drew a long, slow breath, listening to the sound of her own lungs, undisturbed, and finally her own. The silence was not empty. It was a foundation. Nova sat perfectly still, her spine straight, refusing to let her mind wander toward the ghost signals of the city. She closed her eyes, shutting out the dim geometry of the room, and practiced the act of doing nothing. It was harder than any battle she had fought. Her thumb twitched, a reflexive memory of scrolling, but she pressed her palm into the floor until the impulse faded. She breathed in the stale, recycled air, savoring the lack of data packets trying to invade her thoughts. She opened her eyes, finding the world exactly as she had left it, still, dormant, and entirely under her control. She stood up, her movements fluid and unhurried. The roar of the megacity was a distant vibration beneath her feet. Yet it no longer commanded her. She looked into the lens, her voice barely rising above the stillness of the chamber. "The greatest rebellion in the future," Nova whispered, "may be reclaiming your own mind." The words did not echo. They settled into the room like dust. In the absence of the algorithm, the weight of her choice felt like a physical anchor. She was no longer a node in a network. She was an individual, and for the first time in a lifetime, she was awake. The walls of the chamber seemed to dissolve, not into darkness, but into the vast, cold reach of the upper atmosphere. The perspective shifted, pulling away from the singular point of the room, climbing until the curvature of the world dominated the field of view. Below, the night side of the planet was not dark. It was a web, a complex, interconnected mesh of light stretched across continents, mirroring the density of human population. These were not city lights alone. They were the digital veins of a species tethered to the infinite feed. From this distance, the individual struggle disappeared, replaced by a rhythmic, pulsing glow that beat like a frantic heart. The light flared in concentrated clusters, massive data centers acting as the synapses of a planetary brain. It was a living map of human desire and distraction, glowing with the heat of billions of simultaneous transactions. Every notification, every scroll, and every click manifested as a flicker in this global grid. It was beautiful, terrifying, and profoundly fragile. The entire Earth looked like a nervous system under siege, caught in a cycle of high-speed processing that never slept. The planet hummed with the weight of its own connectivity, a singular, luminous organism struggling to find a moment of true, unmonitored rest. Nova stood at the edge of the glass, the planet spinning in the dark void behind her. She did not look at the glowing grid. She looked through it. The crossroads were not a physical place on a map, but a threshold in time. She spoke, her voice steady against the silence of the station. "We are standing at a razor edge," Nova said. One path was clear, carved by years of relentless optimization. It led to total exhaustion, a slow erosion of the self, until human desire was nothing more than fuel for an unfeeling engine. It was a descent into a feedback loop that never ended, where the world became a cage of one's own making. Then she shifted her stance, her eyes narrowing as she traced the alternative. The other path was a renaissance, a rebirth of human agency fueled by technology that served rather than consumed. It required the courage to disconnect, to reclaim the focus stolen by the algorithm, and to build worlds that elevated the spirit. The tension in the room thickened. This was no longer a theoretical debate. It was a tipping point. Every person on the planet was currently casting a vote with their attention, and the cumulative weight of those choices would determine if the future was a prison or a wide-open horizon. Nova walked through the gate, and the city breathed. There was no static here, no pressure of 1,000 invisible eyes. The buildings were sculpted from glass and living greenery, glowing with a soft, natural radiance that shifted with the sun. People moved with intent, not urgency. Nova observed a group gathered around a central plaza, where light-based tools projected complex structural models into the open air. They were not staring into handheld devices. They were manipulating the projections with fluid hand gestures, sharing the space and the work. Technology acted as a bridge between their thoughts and the physical world. It was quiet, but it was not empty. The air hummed with a low-frequency harmony, the sound of a system working in rhythm with human biology. She touched a smooth, metallic surface that responded to her presence, warming slightly to match her touch. This was the vision she had chased through the noise. Here, the machines did not dictate the pace. They followed the hand that guided them. Nova stopped in the center of a wide, sun-drenched terrace. She watched a young artist adjust the hue of a virtual sculpture, the colors blending like water. For the first time, the future felt like a landscape designed for growth, not a tally sheet of engagement. Nova walked toward a cluster of children, huddled around a shimmering holographic globe. They were not consuming content. They were building geography. With a wave of a hand, one child expanded a mountain range, tracing the contours of a simulated Earth. The device responded instantly to their curiosity. filling the space with the sights and sounds of the environment they created. It was a school of discovery where the interface was an extension of the imagination. Beside them, an artist stood before a blank canvas of light. With slow, precise movements, they pulled strands of luminescence into intricate, soaring structures that defied gravity. The work was not for a feed or a metric. It was for the sake of the craft itself. Nova watched the light reflect in the artist's eyes, a clarity that was impossible to find in the strobe-lit chaos of the old digital world. Here, the machine served the dreamers. They provided the raw material for wonder, acting as a canvas for the human spirit to expand. Nova realized that the tools were neutral. They were mirrors reflecting the intent of the hand that held them. When directed by a mind seeking truth and beauty, the technology ceased to be a cage. It became a bridge to a higher form of existence. Nova walked to the edge of the terrace and braced her hands against the cool stone railing. Below, the city moved with a rhythmic, steady pulse. No one was rushing. No one was staring at a screen. She stood for a long moment, watching the way the light played across the gardens, letting the stillness of this space settle into her movements. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of distant, melodic chimes. She did not look away. She pushed off the railing, stepped toward the center of the terrace, and stopped. The air around her was clear. She turned her head slowly, finding the lens. Her eyes were steady. She did not raise her voice, but her words carried across the space, sharp and precise. In a world where everything fights for your attention, she said, "What you choose to focus on becomes your future." She held the gaze for a heartbeat, waiting for the weight of the realization to land. There was no flicker of doubt in her posture. She stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, framed by the architecture of a world that had reclaimed its own purpose. The choice was not in the machine, it was in the person looking through the lens. Nova did not move. She watched as the artificial luminescence of the megacity dimmed, replaced by the soft, ambient glow of the night sky above. Across the sprawling grid, windows that were once locked in a frantic strobe began to darken, one by one. The sharp, erratic hum of high-frequency data transmission slowed. It deepened, shifting into a rhythmic, steady vibration that resonated through the glass floor beneath her feet. It was the sound of a city breathing. People emerged from their dwellings, stepping out onto balconies and into open squares. They were not looking down at handheld devices. They were looking up, heads tilted toward the horizon, eyes tracing the movement of stars that had been invisible for generations. The silence that filled the space was thick with peace. It was not the heavy, suffocating weight of isolation, but the quiet of a community finally present in its own reality. Nova took a slow breath, her chest rising and falling in sync with the city. The light on the horizon softened. The edges of the architecture blurred into the encroaching shadow. One by one, the last few artificial indicators blinked out. The scene lost its color, sliding into deep, velvet blackness. Only the faint, resonant hum remained, hanging in the stillness like a memory of a world that had finally learned to look up.